Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to begin with just a word of thanks for everyone who has come to attend this recital, notably my parents, also Freddie and Sylvia Jones, and then one of the associate pastors at my childhood church, Karen Williams. Thank you so much for coming, and just from the bottom of my heart, thank you. This recital is a love project for little Sylvia, who had dreams of singing and was encouraged by so many to go after those dreams, and I wouldn't be here where I am today without all of you here, so thank you. As you're going in, go ahead and find a seat. So the beginning of this recital will be just a lecture portion. As some of you know, most of my research is based in Black sacred music, and so this is a coming together of my research for the past 3 to 5 years, as well as my personal experience. So, we'll begin. He told me I couldn't join the choir because I sounded too black. These were the words of a friend who was led to believe by a music educator that her voice did not belong in a choral setting. The student was gifted in music and would have been a valuable member to the ensemble if she was only given a chance to learn. Unfortunately, many students have encountered similar experiences. Young classical singers who grew up singing in the Black American gospel tradition often feel that their voice is made up of 2 different instruments, one for gospel and one for classical music. The purpose of this lecture recital, I should say, and its accompanying research is to bridge the gap between classical and gospel singing techniques. This bridging can be achieved by equipping teachers and students of singing with a shared vocabulary between both genres, as well as knowledge of the dissimilarities between the 2 styles. Though there are differences in how the vocal mechanism is used in each genre, the vocal mechanism is still the same. In other words, singing is singing. The fundamentals of good singing are held across all genres. Good singing, for the scope of this paper or this recital, is characterized as resonant, on the breath, unstrained sound production that does not cause vocal injury. Resonance is defined as the quality in a sound of being deep, full, and reverberating. Resonance, though important in all genres, is especially emphasized in opera, which does not prefer the use of electronic amplification. Instead, it refers to the singer's format. The phrase "on the breath" refers to singing that is supported by a consistent airflow. Lastly, good singing does not cause vocal injury. These injuries may include nodules, which are calluses on the vocal folds caused by vocal abuse, leading to hoarseness and a low, breathy sound. Creator of somatic voice work method, Jeanette Levitri, argues for functional training in her article, The Necessity of Using Functional Training in the Independent Studio. Functional training is, quote, any training that allows vocalists to gradually develop mechanical control over any sung sound without sacrificing freedom and authenticity, end quote. Similar to training an athlete through strengthening the regimen for sport, functional training conditions the muscles of the vocal mechanism over time, indirectly and through exercises, to respond automatically. Functional training is more generalized than training in specific vocal techniques. Now, in contrast, Levitri argues that contemporary commercial music, or CCM, genres all require different types of techniques that cannot be gained just through classical or operatic training. One reason for the uniqueness of classical technique is because of the audience for which this music was created in the 16th through 19th centuries. This audience was made up of royalty, it was used for music in the church, and the aristocracy. So this music required a formal and elevated sound that transcended the sound of the common folk, the people. Though folk music later on may have inspired certain subgenres of classical music, think of dance suites or jigs, The goal was to create a transcendent vocal beauty. In contrast to CCM, think rock, pop, R&B, jazz, gospel, and country, that music was created in the style of the people, to be the voice of the people. And this is very important in gospel music specifically. This folk-like character is extremely evident in gospel music, which was derived from the folk spiritual. But even genre-specific techniques are contested. If we look at classical music, Lovitri suggests that professionals in opera or classical music cannot agree on what makes a good classical vocalist. Ultimately, Lovitri is stating that vocal music is diverse not only in genres and styles, but also in technique, even within the broader genres of the styles. In order for a singer to successfully sing in multiple styles, he or she must have an understanding of basic functional technique in their own instrument. And then they will be able to branch out and learn the specific techniques of other styles. Lastly, Lovitri encourages voice teachers to experiment with and learn other styles of music so that they can properly train their students in the styles they are unfamiliar with. So, what are the specific techniques necessary for gospel singing? Several scholars and practitioners have attempted to answer the question. Daryl Jordan, gospel clinician and artist, discusses the hallmarks of gospel vocal technique, and where they can be found is in his article, Just Another Sunday, Widening the Scope of Gospel Singing Pedagogy. Jordan encourages voice teachers and students to experience gospel music making in a Black church in the original context of gospel music. The context of the Black church is essential to understanding gospel music in general, as it reveals the function and the stimuli behind the music being created. Jordan describes how, quote, "much of gospel is derived from the sound of a preacher and a congregation in the Black church," end quote. As stated earlier, gospel music is derived from folk traditions that can be traced back to the plantations. This, what I like to call folkism or folk borrowing or technique, is rooted in human speech and verbal responses, which are later translated into the growls, the squalls, the riffs and runs, the moans that we hear, and other traits that we hear found in gospel singing. Wendy DeLeo-Leborn also uses the analogy of a vocal athlete in her chapter, Vocal Health and the Gospel Vocal Athlete, from So You Want to Sing Gospel by Dr. Trinice Robinson Martin. She encourages worship vocalists to train their voices similarly to sports athletes to build up muscle and stamina. Gospel music requires agility, flexibility, and a dynamic instrument due to its intense demands. Therefore, the singers should take care to warm up their voice and sing 20 to 45 minutes a day when they are between services and rehearsals. Singers must think of their instruments similarly to professional athletes. Using Leborn's imagery, one can think of the larynx like a knee. Both are made of cartilage. If an athlete is about to engage in intense activity, he or she will perform a proper series of stretches and warm-ups to engage surrounding muscles to ease into the desired range of motion. Now, if they don't do that, what happens? You can say it out loud. Injury, yes, injury, that happens. So the only difference between the cartilage in our larynx and our knees is that the knee has nerve endings, and thus injury can be sensed and felt. You can feel the pain. But in our larynx, we don't have nerve endings. And that gives greater reason to be diligent about warming up and being kind, treating our larynx well in order to prevent or avoid unnecessary injury. As with sports, injury comes with the territory of singing. Yet, it is not something to take lightly. It is important to understand that this lecture and recital do not seek to legitimize gospel music. Gospel music is an art form on its own. Although the genre has received less research than other genres, it possesses a substantial repertoire for a style of music that has been official for about a century. In contrast, this program seeks to present the two contrasting genres in a way that emphasizes their similarities and points of fusion. I also acknowledge that it is not the goal of this recital to view gospel music through the lens of Western European classical music. Rather, we are attempting to place gospel singing within gospel singing within a classical singing framework. That is not the goal either. This project examines the two distinct styles and highlights their similarities, or through a shared musical vocabulary and knowledge. Moreover, it is essential to draw attention to the fact that gospel music by nature is a fusion of other genres. For example, Thomas Dorsey, the father of gospel music, drew on his experience as a blues musician to bring his musical expertise into the church as he began to lead choirs and to formally establish gospel music as a genre. Gospel is a fusion of jazz and rock and R&B, country, choral, pop, and contemporary worship music and contemporary Christian music. There have been times when artists such as Walter Hawkins and others, Walter Hawkins is the writer of that gospel standard, "Oh Happy Day," and artists like him were criticized in the past for incorporating secular genres like soul and Latin into their sacred gospel sound. Yet, over time, these external influences are enveloped by the broad gospel sound. Similarly, classical music has also been incorporated into the genre. The late Richard Smallwood is a great example of this fusion. As a classically trained musician who was raised in the traditional Black church, he blended these sounds that he grew up with and grew up studying into what is an undeniably gospel sound, yet it does not sound like Walter Hopkins or Happy Day or many other gospel standards that we may have considered. This difference exemplifies the variety of subgenres and sounds within gospel music. Moreover, this recital focuses on gospel and classical fusion, specifically for the solo voice. Now, there are several examples within the choral world, whether that's on the classical choral side or the gospel choral side of fusions, but there's not a lot that directly deals with the solo vocal repertoire. It is harder to find these intermixings, other than going beyond the Negro spiritual. And spirituals are also not the best example of that because they constitute their own distinct genre within Black sacred music. So I have selected 8 songs that exhibit both classical and gospel aesthetics and techniques. Some songs are from my early childhood and others are newly discovered. They all bring together a question that many other classically trained African American musicians like myself ask ourselves. How can I bring both of my classical and gospel worlds together? Many vocalists have felt that we have 2 instruments, our classical and our gospel voices, and never the 2 shall meet. However, this recital will demonstrate that they are actually one. These 2 sounds are produced by the same instrument. The technique may differ, but the mechanics remain the same. Like our fellow wind instruments, one can use the same trumpet to play jazz as they do classical music. There are different techniques, granted, and sound aesthetics for the respective genres, but the trumpet still functions basically as it does in both styles. Moreover, or additionally, there are fundamentals of trumpet playing that are shared between the 2 styles. We can and we should regard the voice in the same way. Thus, the title of this recital, Amen. The word amen is used to show agreement, and this recital demonstrates agreement between 2 styles, genres, and techniques. So let's talk a little bit about the similarities, thinking contextually. This recital will highlight similarities in the treatment of text registration mixing, and the infusion of classical instrumental support of a soulful melodic line, and vice versa. In other words, cross-genre instrumental support. Let's talk about text. So in the chapter Africanisms and African American Music and Africanisms in American Culture, Portia K. Maltsby describes the mechanics of delivery in Black music. For example, she states, quote, Black audiences demand variety in music performances, and they expect musicians to bring a unique interpretation to each performance and to each song, end quote. Citing Melanie Burnham, Maltsby goes on to describe how singers meet the expectations of their audiences through manipulations of time, text, and pitch. For the sake of this recital or this presentation, we'll focus on text. The emphasis of text has been important since the Renaissance era in classical Western music. Word painting was often used to heighten the dramatic effect of words, serving as a literalization of sung words. If you're in my Engaging with Music class, we talked about that this week. In a gospel context, this may be done through runs or melismas. For example, For Every Mountain, which we'll hear later on, you'll hear several runs and riffs that emphasize certain words or emotions. For example, in the line, a brand new mercy along with each new day, the singer emphasizes the significance of God's new mercies by singing a descending melismatic line on the word brand. The singer emphasizes the significance of God's new mercies by singing that descending line. However, this is pretty common in gospel music. However, this is done spontaneously, whereas classical composers like Handel have employed this compositional technique as well. For example, if we listen to or think about Rejoice Greatly, the aria from Messiah, the words rejoice often are used, or there are runs and melismas to depict rejoicing. Repetition of text is present in each of the pieces of this recital. However, let's look specifically at how composers Lori Laitman and Alma Irene Basil Ambrosio set up similar text in their pieces. If I, and then my living shall not be in vain. Laitman sets the text of Emily Dickinson's poem, If I Can Stop One Heart from Breaking, while Ambrosio sets a hymn text that may have been based on Dickinson's work. So as you can see, the sentiment of the text is similar in that the speaker expresses a desire to help others. If they are successful in aiding others, then their life will have meant something, it will have mattered. This can be drawn upon, or may have drawn upon the idea that is laid out in the Great Commission or the work of the Good Samaritan in the Bible. As Christians, we are to help and love our neighbors. Our life should be lived beyond self-gratification. Laitman uses immediate repetition of text in measures 14 through 21, where it states, I shall not live in vain, which is highlighted. Ambrosio also repeats this text in immediate succession, where this shows emphasis of the same phrase, I shall not live in vain. However, Ambrosio's gospel hymn, the soloist is expected to take artistic liberty and further communicate the text through their delivery. You'll hear this through the use of melismas or runs, high notes, crescendos, and other elements of musical phrasing. Also worth mentioning is the intensification of text in Walt Whitman Jr.'s Perfect Praise. To contextualize this piece, Walt Whitman is a gospel choir director who frequently blends elements of classical music and gospel music, and Perfect Praise is nothing short of that. We observe text painting in the repetition of the phrase, how excellent, which is sung by the choir. During the first two repetitions of how excellent, the choir is in unison, but to add extra emphasis, they break into three-part harmony, which you'll hear later. Ultimately, the delivery of text is supported by the techniques of the singer in both classical and gospel genres. The technique that is employed by the singer is dependent on the artistic choices discussed by the singer and the collaborative artist. decide where the climax of the piece is and how they want to create musical phrases. The technique of the singer must follow this. For example, there are 2 climatic points in the Lakeman piece, if I, both of which are on the text, I shall not live in vain, where the melodic line soars above the staff. The singer must pace herself in dynamics and tempo shifts, as well as her breath support in order to create a long and meaningful line. The same can be done in the beginning of the gospel song by Kurt Carr, For Every Mountain, where in order to emphasize the text of A Brand New Day, which also soars melodically, the singer also has to pace their breathing, phrasing, dynamics, and timbral choices. Sticking with the same example in For Every Mountain, you'll hear the singer begin in a light, breathy, jazzy quality at the beginning. And they begin to gain voice and momentum as she ascends to the top note of the phrase, A Brand New Day, like I was talking about earlier. All of this is done not for the sake of virtuosity, but for the sake of communication. Thus, the use of techniques to support the delivery of text can be employed similarly across both classical and gospel genres. Now, let's describe or discuss register mixing. According to vocal pedagogue James McKinney, registration is a particular series of notes produced in the same manner by the same vibratory pattern of the vocal folds and having the same basic quality. There are 4 registers, and I'll list them in order. We have vocal fry, which you can think Britney Spears, and then we have natural modo, which is what we normally talk in, and then we have falsetto, which you'll often hear in a barbershop quartet, which sounds a little like this, and then you have whistle, which you can think of Mariah Carey or Ariana Grande when it's when they do that in that Christmas song that I can't think of right now. But those are the 4 registrations. The way I like to think about this is, well, before I get ahead of myself, within that natural mode or modal mode, we have what's known as our chest and our head voice. So chest voice is sort of, if you're hailing a taxi in New York, which you probably don't do anymore, but in the older days you would have, you would say, "Hey, taxi." Now if you were to put your hand over your chest, you would feel some sort of sensation, and that lets us know we're in our chest voice. But then, if you're thinking about our head voice, which if you remember Julia Child, a lot of people don't nowadays, so think maybe Minnie Mouse or Mickey Mouse, but if you were to talk like this would be your head voice, and you can experiment with that on your own. The way I like to think about these, especially within gospel music and classical music, is blending Kool-Aid or lemonade or sweet tea, whatever your favorite mixture drink is. And so as you can see, you have the red dye, that might be your head voice. And then your water may be your chest voice. As singers, we can put a little bit more chest into our sound or a little less chest into our sound to create a different vocal aesthetic. This is used in gospel music, other forms of music, also in classical music. However, classical music is mainly head dominant, at least for treble singers, that being soprano singers in that end. So just quickly moving forward, how this is contextualized in the recital is in the song, Glory, O My Soul. But before I get to that, I just want to backtrack and make sure we got to everything. I got a little excited talking about head and chest voice. Some generalizations to talk about both classical and gospel genres employ that head mixed and chest voice. However, classical often emphasizes the head voice for treble voices. Yet, these are generalizations, and it is often a misconception that to sing gospel, one must only sing in chest voice. This misconception has also led to stigmas around gospel music being a genre that is prone to vocal injury. The negative stigma is being disproven, as we can see through the long-lasting careers of CeCe Winans, whose voice is still in good shape after nearly a 40-year-plus career. If we were to analyze gospel artists like Karen Clark Sheard, who's phenomenal, we would see that she uses timbral shifts or registration mixing as a technique for gospel singing. The secret is these artists are using their mixed voice, meaning they are playing the quotient of head and chest voice. A perfect example of registration mixing in gospel music can be found in Walt Whitman's Perfect Praise, where Lucretia Campbell, the artist on the original recording, was an exemplary example of registration mixing. She starts off in a balanced mix, but as the recording progresses and the choir comes in, she shifts into a complete head voice that is almost operatic. And then she employs also the fourth register with including whistle notes. Whistle is also used in opera, I just want to say that, think the Queen of the Night solo, or the Queen of the Night aria. We will also hear switching from chest to head in the final piece of the recital, Glory, O My Soul. This piece is a fusion combining elements of gospel, the Negro spiritual, and classical music. In the words of the composer, this may have been the most intentional song I've ever written or arranged. I wrote this song with my mother in mind. As an elder, she sang as a mezzo after a surgery. She sang as a soprano when she was younger. That's why it starts in the lower octave, then goes up in the second statement of the melody. Throughout the piece, you'll hear an A-flat major and add 6 and 9. That chord represents my mother's earthly birthday, February 6th, and her heavenly birthday, February 9th. So the song is my mother freshly experiencing glory and asking me the all-important question, don't you want to go? And the melodic line and the tempo shifts aid in conveying this message. So to reiterate, the use of chest voice in the beginning represents the composer's mother's voice in her later years as a mezzo, while she was still earthbound. And as the vocal line ascends, that represents her just ascending into heaven. The last shared element that we'll talk about, and here in this recital, we'll focus on the use of classical instrumental support, a soulful melodic line, and vice versa. This is demonstrated well, especially in Carlos Simon's Caro Mio Ben and Gather Up. Caro Mio Ben was originally from the collection of 24 Italian arias and art songs. It is one of several common pieces for beginning classical singers to learn. Simon offers a fresh interpretation of the piece by maintaining the traditional vocal line while supporting it with a gospel-inspired piano accompaniment. The new accompaniment fosters a dialogue between the piano and the vocal parts that effectively conveys the text meaning. As we saw earlier, the delivery of the text requires the singer to make both technical and aesthetic choices. The singer must consider several ways to create long musical lines that will build longer musical phrases that match the text. Some of these considerations include engaging breath support to maintain longer phrasing, singing legato or connected, vowel production, and vocally navigating the piece's range. Similarly, yet contrastingly with Gather Up, also by Simon, we hear a more jazz-inspired accompaniment with classical vocal timbre and yet gospel expression. It's definitely a fusion. We hear this, and Simon sets Langston Hughes' poem in a way where we only hear fragments of a complete sentence. The singer says, gather up, it's followed by a pause, and then the singer says, in the arms of your pity, which is followed by another pause. This pacing is akin to sermonizing or preaching in the Black church tradition, where to get their point across, the preacher may pace their delivery. You will also hear gospel-style ornamentation to add textual emphasis on words like tired and love. Again, word painting. So in conclusion, there is much that can be said about the fusion of gospel and classical singing techniques. However, keep these three elements that we discussed, they're in the center and bold. Keep these in mind and listen for registration mixing between and in the middle of songs. Listen for text and delivery repetition and emphasis of text. Lastly, see if you can identify the instrumental accompaniment and how the instrumental accompaniment engages in dialogue with the singer aiding in expression. Overall, it is my goal for this recital to feel like traditional Black church, my home. Let the Spirit move you through the music. Gospel music is experimental, or experiential, I should say, and experimental. Notice what you feel. What are you reminded of with the music? And I will close with a reminder of the title of this recital, Amen, a word used for agreement, the agreement of two genres. Thank you. To sort of change things over about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll come back with the musical portion. Thank you and hang tight.